Hello and welcome. We are so glad that you've joined us for today's webinar Wednesdays, supporting families through best practice and overview of the standards of quality for family strengthening and support with New Hampshire implementation. So we are very excited that you've joined us today. I am Julie Matusik, and I will be one of the presenters today. And I am honored to have my colleagues from New Hampshire with me today as well, Maria Doyle and Liz Scutton, and they will be presenting today as well. So a couple housekeeping items as we're diving in. If you are joining us online, you may listen directly through your computer speakers. And if you have joined us via the phone number that Zoom has provided, your line has been muted to minimize background noise. And if you are online, you'll see a link to the handouts in the chat box that my colleague Cheryl is going to put in now. Thank you so much, Cheryl. So in this folder, you'll see that there are handouts that you can download. So in addition to that, having that available to you, want to highlight the chat box, which is open for you to include any comments throughout the webinar that you'd like. And we ask you to direct all of your questions to the Q&A box. So you'll see that right to the right of the chat box. And we'll use that like a parking lot. So go ahead and enter those questions as soon as you think of them to make sure you don't forget them. And if you're having any technical difficulties, we have Cheryl with us here today. She'll be able to help you if you're having any difficulties with audio or video. And all questions related to content, we will answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. And if we are unable to answer all of them, someone from the NFSN or from New Hampshire will follow up with you after the webinar. And also want to mention too that today's PowerPoint, as well as the handouts and of the recording of this webinar, will be available on the NFSN website on the Webinar Wednesday page at this time tomorrow or sooner. So also last thing real quick to mention that when you exit the webinar today, an evaluation will automatically appear on your screen. So we ask that you take a moment to respond to that and complete that evaluation, as it provides us with very valuable feedback to inform future webinars. All right, so now we have a couple questions for you all. We would like to see who's here with us today. So take a look at this map and you'll see we've divided the country into regions. So take a peek here and see which region of the United States and its territories you are located in. And Cheryl's going to launch a poll, and you will see on the poll that there are options for outside of the United States as well. So take a moment to let us know where you're joining us from. All right, take about 5 more seconds and let us know where you are joining us from. All right, let's see those results. Like we have all corners of the United States represented. Our strongest representation is from the Northeast, closely followed by the Midwest, but strong representation from the South and West as well. Wonderful. Thank you so much. All righty. And then this next question that we'll launch is about your affiliation. So let us know what type of affiliation you're working for. So whether you're working for a family resource center or a family resource center network, or another family support program, or maybe you're working in education, government. You'll see we divided government into a couple different groups there, and private funder, and of course, other. Or catch-all. If you put other, feel free to enter in the chat what you're up to. We'd love to learn a little bit about who's here today. All righty, let's peek at those results. Great, it looks like we have lots of representation from FRCs, FRC networks, other family support programs, got some government and private funder representation as well. Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. And the last poll question that we'll ask is about your role. So are you working at the policy or systems level? Are you working at the management level? Or are you working at the program or directly with families? And of course, we have that other as well. We'll give you about 5 seconds to let us know. All right, let's see those results. Great diversity here. Looks like we have all levels represented. Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you all so much for your participation. All right, so we want to start off by sharing some background information about the National Family Support Network. So the National Family Support Network we were founded back in 2011. And over the last decade, we have more than quadrupled in size. And we now have 38 member networks that represent more than 3,000 family resource centers that are serving more than 2 million people annually. So you can see here our current members on this map. And if you are from a state that's not yet green, we would love to connect with you. Our mission is to promote positive outcomes for all children and families and communities by leveraging the collective impact of state networks and championing quality family support and strengthening practices and policies. And our vision, in short, is that map that you just saw, that the whole map would be green, ensuring that the entire country is has families that are supported through strong family resource centers and family resource center networks. So again, if you're from a state that's not yet green, we would love to connect with you. Here you can see our areas of work, and you can see that we are divided into 3 buckets as far as the work that we focus on. The first is about connecting and convening our member networks to enhance their effectiveness. So increasing the connectedness amongst our members for peer learning and for mutual support. And the second is promoting the family support best practices and evaluation. So raising the awareness of what quality family support is and promoting a common language, standards, and evaluation of it through the national implementation of the standards of quality for family strengthening and support. And the third is raising the visibility of the value and the impact of family strengthening and support networks in order to strengthen and increase support for families. And here is our roadmap of our time today. So we will be talking, provide some background information, provide an overview of the standards, and we'll talk about the standards at both the program and systems level. We will have about half of our presentation will be dedicated to the New Hampshire network and then them sharing their valuable experience about the implementation of the standards of quality. And then we will pause for question and answer, and we'll share some resources and events that are up and coming, and we'll close with that evaluation. So when we're talking about these standards, our focus is on families who are responsible for raising children. So these families consist of at least one adult and one child who are related biologically, emotionally, or legally. And families may consist of one parent, two parents, grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, or they may arise from a need for mutual support. And you can see here, this is the timeline for when the standards were developed. So they were first created back in 2012 at the California network. And then in 2013, the national network adopted them for national implementation. And then in 2020, the National Network engaged member networks from across the country, and as well as parent leaders, Canadian family support folks, and the Center for the Study of Social Policy to review and revise these standards with a particular focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as for relevance for both the United States and Canada. And then this new version, about a year ago, was approved by the National Network membership. And so these standards are important for so many reasons, but you can see here a couple reasons that we would like to highlight them. So these standards help ensure that families are supported and strengthened through quality practice. They also create a common language and expectations across different kinds of family strengthening programs. And these standards are designed to be used by all stakeholders. So all of the folks that are here today, all of your types of programs, so public departments, foundations, community-based organizations, and families as a tool for planning, providing, and assessing quality practice. And one thing that we want to highlight as well is that we're not selling these standards. These standards are available for free to download on the National Network website. So you can, if you go to nationalfamilysupportnetwork.org and then hover over standards, you can drop down to click on overview to download a copy of the standards. And if you drop down to standards implementation, you'll be able to view all of the standards implementation tools. So everything is available for you to use free of charge. And so when we kicked off, we heard a little bit about who is here today in our virtual webinar. So I know many of you represent family strengthening and support programs such as family resource centers. So you can use the standards as a blueprint for implementing best practice for self-assessment and to demonstrate quality. And for those of you that are working directly with families, you can use the standards to reflect on and enhance your work with families. And I know there were network level folks here too, which is great. If you are working at the network level, you can use the standards for quality assurance, for training and technical assistance, and to adopt as an expectation for membership. And if we have any policymakers here today, you can use the standards to endorse for application in your area of influence. And I know we have some funders here today as well. You can use the standards to integrate into requests for proposals, for monitoring, and for quality assurance. And families are able to use the standards effectively as well. So you can use the standards to partner with programs to apply the standards and to provide feedback about how well a program is applying the standards. And so one thing to mention too, when we're talking about the program's application of these standards, it does require the commitment and the support of all levels of program responsibility. So it's not something that an executive director could do by herself. It's not something that a direct service staff could do by himself. We're all coming together to work as a team to implement these standards. And so the standards are, they uniquely integrate and operationalize two key frameworks from our field. So the principles of family support practice, this framework was developed by Family Support America. That's one of the frameworks. And the second is the research-based and evidence-informed strengthening families protective factor framework, or the 5 protective factors, as you may have heard of them. And they were developed by the Center for the Study of Social Policy. So the standards are based on these two frameworks. So we're not going to go into these two frameworks in significant detail today, but want to just mention that the principles of family support did come to us from Family Support America back in 1981, and they continue to guide and frame the field today. And so the first principle says that the staff and families work together in relationships based on equality and respect. So this principle doesn't seem super revolutionary to us today in 2022, but at the time that it was written, it presented quite a challenge to the system. So at the time, the prevailing wisdom was that the staff were the experts with their education, their knowledge, and their experience, and that their goal was to quote unquote fix the problem family. But this principle challenged that notion by saying that the staff and families are equal and that the staff do come to the table with their education, their knowledge, and their experience. But the families, they also bring valuable things to the table, and they are actually the most knowledgeable about their own experiences. And it's by working as partners in relationships based on equality and respect that we'll achieve the best outcomes for families. And the second principle says that the staff enhance families' capacity to support the growth and the development of all family members, so adults, youth, and children. So this isn't just one family member that we're focused on the whole family. And the third principle says that families are resources to their own members, to other families, to the programs, to their communities. So the staff aren't doing all of the work. They aren't having all of the answers. The families are supporting each other. And the fourth principle is oftenly referred to as the diversity principle. And it talks about being welcoming and respecting the diversity that families bring. And it also talks about how the families can be prepared for and ready to connect with a larger community where they'll naturally interact with people that are different from themselves. The fifth principle highlights the community building aspects of programs and how they are not simply social service providers, they are community builders as well. The sixth principle highlights that programs are advocating with families for services and systems that are fair and responsive and accountable to the families served. So, if you think about some of the major systems that families are commonly interacting with, maybe education, healthcare, the legal system, are these systems, are they all fair and responsive and accountable? Often not. So, that's where our work comes in. And here's the last three principles. The seventh principle says that practitioners are working with families to mobilize both formal and informal resources to support family development. And the eighth principle says that programs are flexible and continually responsive to emerging family and community issues. So, this concept of flexibility and responsiveness are so important in our field. If you think about what neighborhoods looked like a few years ago, they changed over the years and issues emerge that significantly affect families. So, economic downturn, the pandemic, communities change, and our programs need to be responsive to that. And this last principle is very much our catch-all principle, and it says that all of the above principles should be applied in everything we do. So planning, governance, and administration. So that's our first framework that the standards are based upon. And the second is the strengthening families approach, which again comes to us from the Center for the Study of Social Policy and was developed back in 2005. And they are research based and evidence informed, and they have been proven to increase family stability, enhance child development, and reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. And here on this next slide, you will see the 5 protective factors. So the five protective factors are parental resilience, social connection, concrete support in times of need, knowledge of parenting and child development, and the social and emotional competence of children. And if you visit the Center for the Study of Social Policy's website and click on their Strengthening Families tab, you'll be able to learn much more about this framework. There's so much to learn more about this framework, so I encourage you to check that out. So now that we have talked about the two frameworks that the standards are based upon, let's talk about the standards themselves. So the standards are divided into 5 sections, and each of these 5 sections represent a key element of quality practice. So here they're listed: family centeredness, family strengthening, diversity, equity, and inclusion, community strengthening, and evaluation. And within those 5 sections, there are 15 standards total. And each standard includes 1 to 2 sets of indicators of both foundational quality and high quality. And so the foundational quality indicators, they demonstrate the basic application of the standard. And then the program builds upon the foundational quality indicators to achieve high quality indicators, which represents deeper integration of the standard. And so looking at the examples, if you've downloaded the standards, you'll see that each indicator is followed by 2 to 4 examples from the field that illustrate its application. So these examples they're provided as illustrators, and they're not meant to be a checklist or limited to the one-sided. And so in the certification training on the standards, a significant focus is on participants thinking about their own examples that demonstrate the indicators in ways relevant to their own programs. So, and then as those programs are applying these standards, they are encouraged to identify their own examples that demonstrate the indicators in ways relevant to their own communities. And so let's look at this together real quick about the indicators. So foundational quality indicators create a solid foundation for family support and strengthening programs. And foundational quality indicators, they are designed to be met within the basic resources of a typical family support and strengthening program. And then the high quality indicators, they are built upon foundational quality being in place first. So we aren't just jumping to high quality. We have to have that solid foundation underneath us. And programs are encouraged to strive to meet high quality indicators in order to serve families most effectively. And some high quality indicators may require additional capacity building or additional resources to meet. So let's look at this continuum along the bottom. So on the left, we start with foundational quality not yet addressed, and then we're approaching foundational quality, and then we're meeting foundational quality. So right there in the middle, that's where foundational quality begins. And then we continue along the continuum to approach high quality, and then we're meeting both foundational and high quality. And you'll see at the bottom, the arrow keeps going after we've already met both foundational and high quality. And this is because quality improvement is an ongoing and continuous process. So this is why you won't hear us call high quality maximum quality. Also want to mention too that implementing these standards is very much a developmental process, and it's common that programs may see different aspects of their work along different points of the quality continuum. So as we go through the standards, as you're exploring them, you may determine that you're already doing quality work in some areas, and then hopefully can also identify areas to work on further as well. So let's talk about the movement from foundational to high quality. So for the first 4 sections of the standards, this is the arrow that we use to explain the movement from foundational to high quality. So on the left, we see foundational quality. And then on the right, we see that high quality, which represents that deeper integration into the program. So what moves us from foundational to high quality are the elements in the arrow. So the first is formal structure. So this is things like design, policies, procedures, and intentional strategies with committed resources that ensure consistency of practice. And then staff training to support the implementation of the standards. In family partnerships, so this is actually partnering with families in the implementation of the standards. So each of these elements helps ensure that the standards are more deeply integrated into program practice. So, for example, at foundational quality, we may be doing something that's good practice, but then how are we actually ensuring that it wasn't just a one time occurrence? And then at high quality, we have actually set up systems, trainings, and or we have partnered with families to ensure that it continues to happen on an ongoing basis. So the particular elements and the number of elements that are needed for high quality differ for various indicator pairs. So sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two, and sometimes it's all three, but it's never anything other than these three. All right, so let's take a look at this standard. So this comes right out of the standards if you download them. And the standard here is this is standard FC1. It's in the family centeredness section. So that's why we're getting the FC from. So the standard is that the program engages families to participate in program development and implementation. The foundational quality indicator here is that the program solicits input from families to shape and plan the program and services. And the high quality indicator here is that the program's design supports partnering with families to have an active role in the development and implementation of the program. Let's look at the difference between foundational and high quality here. So, as you can see in the arrow, formal structure and family partnership are the elements that move us from foundational to high quality. All right, so this is the evaluation arrow. So as with the arrow that we used in the first four sections of the standards, we see foundational quality on the left, and on the right, we see high quality, which represents that deeper integration into the program. But the elements are different that we see in the arrow. So the elements here are that we have. The first is data analysis. So collecting data is foundational quality, but then analyzing the data is what moves us to high quality. And then sharing evaluation results. So we're sharing these results with various stakeholders, such as the families that we're working with. And program modification. So this means changing the program as a result of what we learn from evaluation. So we aren't just doing evaluation for evaluation's sake. We're actually doing something with it. All righty. So also want to highlight those tools. I had mentioned that if you hovered over standards and drop down to implementation tools on the website, you would find these access to these tools. So just want to talk about each of them briefly. So the program self-assessment tool is the first one, and it is designed to be used as a critical thinking exercise by program teams, by managers, direct service staff, parent leaders, everyone coming together. And it's recommended that all team members involved in this tool be trained on the standards first. And then we have two other tools. The next is the staff self-reflection tool, and this consists of 18 questions for staff members to use as a daily reminder to implement the standards. So keeping this on their desks or somewhere where they're able to see it regularly as an ongoing reminder of how to implement the standards. And then the standards participant survey is the third tool, and it shows how well the program is meeting the standards from the participant's point of view. So it's not a satisfaction survey that you might think of initially. And actually, the questions mirror those that are on the staff tool. So if the staff members are mindful of these questions, then the program participants are likely to give the program high scores as well. So again, all of these are included on the website. Encourage you to check those out. And so also want to highlight with these standards, the certification training and training at large is a fundamental strategy for implementing these standards effectively. So the certification training is an in-person or virtual training designed for all staff. So um, and actually want to highlight before we get to that, that we are so glad that you're here for this webinar. But just as a reminder, this isn't the training. This is just an overview where you can learn more about the standards and kind of get you dip your feet in the water a bit. But in order to receive a certificate, you'd want to participate in the certification training. And I'll let you know more about how to do that in just a few minutes. So these certification trainings are conducted by pairs of trained trainers from across the country. And so networks, funders, stakeholders, everyone can also contract with the NFSN to bring the certification training to your area if your state does not yet have standards trainers. And programs are highly encouraged to come as teams of both management and direct service staff to the training because successful application of the standards requires the commitment and the support of all levels of program responsibility. And one thing that's unique about this framework, about these standards, is that the individuals are certified, not organizations. So that integrates the standards into everyone's daily work and provides a professional credential for staff. And all trainings are live because of the group work and that valuable peer sharing that takes place about the standards. And the Training of Trainer Institute is a 4-day in-person or 5-day virtual training. This is for unique for representatives of NFSN member networks to be able to conduct the certification trainings in their area. So only network representatives are trained to be trainers, which supports their capacity building and establishes a unique, essential, and ongoing role for them within their system of support for families in their area. And currently, all both the certification trainings and the Training of Trainer Institutes are virtual, but we are beginning to explore and chart out what it will be like to go back in person. So stay tuned. Here on this next slide, you'll see where the standards have traveled nationwide. Anywhere you see that's blue, you can see that the standards have a standards training has, at least a standards training has taken place. You'll see that many of these states also have trained trainers that are delivering these trainings as well. And this map is updated monthly, and it's great to see where the standards have gone over the past decade and where they continue to go. Here you can see a bit about the training impact and what those certified are saying about the standards. And on this next slide, you'll see a few other quotes as well. So as you can see, the standards help validate existing work, benchmarking it to national best practice. And also want to highlight that Family Resource Center networks have formed and expanded through the standard certification training, that their capacity is actually strengthened and just what an opportunity the networks have for using the standards. And want to share with you two other tools. So this is our program implementation continuum. This one is also appears in the handouts folder that was chatted out earlier, and we'll chat it out again in a little bit. That'll be in that chat box there. So you'll see various steps along the top. So if you're working at the program level, so such as a family resource center, you'll see below that sample activities for each of those steps, and then the resources that are available to you through the NFSN and the potential costs associated with them. So this is a roadmap of sorts as you're using the standards. And you'll see that one of the first items in that prepare column is to review the standards overview presentation. So you are already well on your way. And then this one is the network implementation continuum. This is for family resource center networks. So those of you that are convening FRCs, you have a similar but different roadmap. And so similarly, along the prepare phase is the standards overview presentation, and you'll see the other items here as well, such as hosting a certification training and continuing to develop. So you'll see the resources that are available to you through the NFSN, as well as the potential cost. So wanted you to have all of this valuable foundational information. So you're familiar with the standards at least a little bit, got your feet wet. And now we are so excited to introduce to you our guest presenters for today. And I am joined by Maria and Liz from Family Support New Hampshire, and so excited to introduce them to you to walk you through their incredible work that they're doing in New Hampshire. Thank you so much for being here, ladies.
Most
Thanks for
welcome. It's
having
great
us.
to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to share a little bit about what the work that was kept, that the standards of quality were very much a catalyst for in New Hampshire. And you can go to the next slide. So first, to give you a little bit of a landscape, Family Support New Hampshire is the state network of family resource centers. We have about 20 family resource centers in the state. It's sort of a moving target in that we have FRCs that have multiple sites. We have larger agencies that have FRCs embedded within them, and we also have emerging FRCs. So, but 20 is a good ballpark number to tell you. And this is about how they are organized around the state. They have no unified or universal funding. Some have public contracts, some are completely private funded by foundations and donors. And they just are really as unique as all the multiple communities of New Hampshire. But they recognize that they have some commonalities, and that's been a real strength of FSNH in helping them identify their commonalities. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of a brief history. Oh, and I see my click is not working. So they're filling the whole timeline all at once. But I'll tell you a little bit about how we got to where we are. So the history starts probably much before 1999, but I'll start with 1999. When the New Hampshire legislature, really led by some legislators and other community members who really believed in family resource centers, and they saw them as sort of little havens of places doing great work. They looked to our neighbor to the west, Vermont, and really saw that they had a network of what they call parent support centers, and saw them as being places where primary prevention happened, and not New Hampshire Children's Trust is focused on primary prevention of child maltreatment, but they really saw multiple areas, whether it be relationship safety and substance misuse prevention and juvenile justice prevention. They really identified all the areas and saw family resource centers as being great resources to address them in a very upstream sort of way. So they formed the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council. It was established by the legislature, and it really has a cross-sector membership identified in statute of, in addition to a member of our House of Representatives and a member of our state Senate, it also has members from the public sector, DHHS, including our Child Protection Agency, DCYF, as well as our Division of Public Health Services. It also has the executive directors or designee of a number of agencies who are working on primary prevention. So our executive director or designee of our statewide coalition against sexual and domestic violence, the New Hampshire chapter of NAMI, the New Hampshire Children's Trust, an agency identified because of its work in substance misuse prevention, called New Futures. It has, as well as having regional representation of family resource centers. The president of Fsnh has a designated seat of Family Support New Hampshire. And this was really, it remains the only statewide convening of folks doing primary prevention in our state. So that was established by statute in 1999. Which also seems is the year that Family Support New Hampshire established itself as a 501c3. FRCs and others engaged in what we now call family support and strengthening were meeting. They were actually meeting as New Hampshire Children's Trust grantees and called themselves Network New Hampshire. And in 1999, they established themselves as a 501c3, and at some point changed their name to Family Support New Hampshire, being the New Hampshire chapter of the organization that Julie mentioned earlier, Family Support America, that developed the principles of family support. So always New Hampshire was feeling united. It was a core of our membership that we were ascribing to the membership, the principles of family support. New Hampshire Children's Trust had a strong relationship, being a member of Family Support New Hampshire, alongside FRCs and others who believed in the work that FRCs were doing. In 2008, some of the legislators that sat on the WPPC and others got some money put into our state budget, which we have a biennial budget. So the budget and the legislature, in fact, can turn over every 2 years. But they authorized a small amount of money for family resource centers in our state. And our Department of Health and Human Services was tasked with coming up with when our state has money and is putting out contracts, it comes up with certification for payment standards. So the legislature got some money put in the budget for FRCs, but then came the question, well, who are the family resource centers and which family resource centers should receive this money? And so they had to create certification for payment standards, which is what our state's mechanism for deciding who meets the qualifications to receive funding. And this is something that family resource centers had not gone through before, because our state does it per service. So this collection of certification for payment standards, which basically defined family resource centers as being eligible for funding, were developed. But they were, as our biennial budget sometimes happens, the money, I believe, was in the 2008 budget and then again in the 2010 budget, and then I believe it went away. So basically, the process needed to get established, and then FRC started to go through it, and then suddenly this process went away because the money was no longer allocated in the budget. And so that started a conversation about, well, who are the FRCs? I mean, there's no defining characteristic of what makes a family resource center. And in 2000, I think actually it may have been a little earlier than 2013, New Hampshire became aware, some members of Family Support New Hampshire became aware of the standards of quality, because because as a statewide network, we were contacted and actually learned about what is now called the National Family Support Network, and discovered these standards. And they really informed this conversation of, is there a way that we know that we have family resource centers know that they had things in common, that they had principles that united them, but is there a way that we could create a process that would kind of be almost, that would distinguish family resource centers as being meeting certain standards, I guess, but we weren't thinking about the standards of quality yet. But that certain criteria that would identify them as being worthy of funding. funders in our state were very, the private funders were very supportive of this idea. And in 2014, they funded Family Support New Hampshire to hold a study group about what would a sustainable network of family resource centers look like in New Hampshire. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'll just use it as a placeholder on our timeline right now. Another thing I want to say about 2013 that Julie mentioned about that was the year that the standards were adopted nationally, and a little part of New Hampshire pride is that Family Support New Hampshire actually hosted that meeting. It was a national convening when the network, I think, had 11 members, I think. So we all fit into one conference room. And that vote to nationally adopt the standards actually happened here in Manchester. So, so in 2015, we invited the National Family Support Network to come to New Hampshire, and the very first standards training was held in New Hampshire, and 2 trainers from New Hampshire got trained in 2015 as well. In 2015, the legislation that defined the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council was amended to empower the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council to designate family resource centers of quality. So this was an outgrowth of the study group that to create a process that family resource centers could distinguish themselves as being designated as family resource centers of quality. And I'll say more about that in a second. One of the outgrowths of the study group in 2014 is that it wasn't sufficient enough to have just individual family resource centers distinguish themselves as family resource centers of quality, but also there needs to be, in order to have a sustainable network, that there needs to be sort of a backbone to it all. And because of other advocacy issues happening in the state, the term facilitating organization came to be understood. And so the folks advocating around a sustainable network of family resource centers embraced that term as well. And so advocacy and exploration and partnership continued to have the state provide funding for a facilitating organization for family resource centers. And that happened in a request for proposals was issued in 2019, and New Hampshire Children's Trust was named in that role. Prior to that, when the FRC quality process was established, with basically without any funding to support the process, and just because folks believed in it, 3 family resource centers became designated. In 2019, New Hampshire Children's Trust was named as the facilitating organization and was able to formally support and provide backbone support to both FRCs and to the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council to navigate that process. And again, I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. And so now in 2022, I'm happy to report that we now have 11 of our 20-ish family resource centers are designated as family resource centers of quality. And we've always worked along closely with Family Support New Hampshire, but really the profile of family resource centers has grown, and Family Support New Hampshire was always primarily it was run by a volunteer board. It had a very small budget, and really the leadership that was needed was greater than the capacity, the coordination that was necessary, and the tables that FSNH were being asked to sit at really outpaced the capacity of a volunteer board. And as a result of their strategic planning process, they approached New Hampshire Children's Trust about becoming a program of New Hampshire Children's Trust. And so that happened earlier this year, and we were pleased. And that's when Liz Scrutton, my co-presenter today, is joined our staff and her primary responsibility is to coordinate the network. So it provides them some staff support so that they can be doing the important work of running their programs. and we'll talk a little bit more about how we intend to keep it a very member-run or member-influenced organization. So we can go to the next slide now. So that's a big overview of, so what, yeah, just keep going. I'll go through all of it. Thank you. So that I mentioned a study process in 2014. What we learned pretty quickly about through the multiple stakeholders, the family resource centers, the public and private partners, the funders that we talked to, was that a family resource center of quality designation process should be non-regulatory. We didn't want it to be licensure. That it should be a voluntary process, but it should be a rigorous process, and that the designation should be made by a credible external body. So Family Support New Hampshire, to be the designating body, was seen as kind of too inside, like not really that good housekeeping seal of approval that the members of the study group and FSNH was looking for. And not necessarily not just peers approving peers, but they're having other knowledgeable cross-sector invested partners. And another thing that came out of this study group was that, again, that there should be some backbone support, which was termed a facilitating organization. So it really was seen because of the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council's membership and role as being connected, identified in statute, and having cross-sector partners that had a range of experience about family resource centers, but lots of knowledge about primary prevention. We saw them as an ideal body. And so, as I said, in 2015, the legislation establishing the Wellness and Primary Council was amended to empower them to be the designating body. But again, it is mostly, members are supported by their agencies, by their organizations to be there, although it does also, and I forgot to mention this, in the leadership, in the council membership is also a parent, a representative, and so, but everyone else is in there in a professional capacity, but how council and committee work is often crowded onto usually a very full plate. Next slide, please. So the idea is that these would be the benefits of being designated as a family resource center of quality. That we're hoping that it could be sort of a proxy for funders, that that there would be certain criteria that people could expect about being fiscally stable and sustainable organizations, and so it was recommended that elements be integrated that are often part of funders' inquiries, so that hopefully that family resource centers would have an easier time in seeking funding if they had the designation, because they went through this rigorous process. And it was also hoped that by being designated and by having having backbone support, that the facilitating organization could provide an efficiency and be a vehicle to get funding to all family resource centers, but particularly family resource centers of quality, because some of our family resource centers, as I said, are small and don't have the bandwidth to have public funding. So with the essence of a facilitating organization, they could provide some of that backbone support to expand that capacity, to expand the diversity of family resource centers that could receive funding. That we were hoping that the Family Resource Center of Quality would provide a framework for continuous quality improvement. So I know there's a range of knowledge about the standards of quality, but one important part of implementing them is self-assessment. And it's ongoing self-assessment, because it invites you to figure out how to increase your quality with regard to the standards. And so the learning about the standards was and seeing that continuous quality improvement, it provided another sort of unifying way that family resource centers could have them establish sort of uniform practices or practices in common with each other. And that we were hoping that the designation process would provide a source of pride for everyone connected to the FRC. Next slide, please. So the process for designation was developed using a advisory group to the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council. So a small group of folks, including members of the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council and others, developed the process. But it because New Hampshire was getting to know the standards at the same time as we were developing the process, there was a challenge in that we were hoping that family resource centers would embrace the standards as part of their CQI, continuous quality improvement processes, and not just see it as, oh, this is something that I have to do in order to be designated, but rather that family resource centers of quality are defined by the fact that they, in an ongoing way, use the standards. And we also recognized that the standards can be applied in any setting, as long as a program wants to work with families in a strength-based way, like the Strengthening Families framework maps out for us. And as long as they wanted to work with families in equal partnership, the way the principles of family support lay out, then it doesn't need to be an FRC. So, and there were other elements that people that the study group consulted with and that were part of the study group identified as being organizationally necessary to define themselves as a FRC. So, so what we did is that New Hampshire developed a second set of standards. Next slide, please. And these are called the New Hampshire Family Resource Center of Quality Operational Standards. We sought to structure them similar to the standards of quality. They have 4 sections. One, and they're listed here. There's service provision, location, and space, because we were clear that family resource centers were a space. But interestingly, when we tried to develop specific standards and indicators in the location and space section, we found that they were articulated elsewhere, either in one of the other sections of the operational standards or in the standards of quality. So although it's called out as a section, and centers are encouraged to reflect on when they're doing the self-assessment on how they've intentionally created space and chosen their location, and how they've done that in partnership with parents. There aren't any specific standards and indicators in those sections. The other section is staffing, and the other section is organizational structure. And so as part of the handouts that you'll find in the Dropbox, I think by tomorrow, that Charlotte has provided in the link, we've provided the operational standards, and similar to the standards of quality, there's one document that offers the operational standards with potential examples. And then there's a second document that's the self-assessment. So they're pretty New Hampshire specific, but I'm pleased to have you refer to them. And so I'll show you an example of them, and I'm going to say right now they need to be revised. People familiar with the standards of quality, can we go to the next slide, please? So people familiar with the standards of quality will see that this harkens back to the old version of the standards, in that the quality indicator on the left is called the minimum quality indicator. When the standards are these operational standards are revised, they will be it will also reflect foundational quality indicator. But so this is the very first standard in the service provision section. So in here, very New Hampshire specific, in the statute that establishes the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council, it defines family resource centers. So this standard invites programs to reflect on being a place that is available and open to all families, and not just meaning both the diversity of the community as well as the fact that they're not just open to families that are facing a particular challenge. And as you can see, also similar to the standards of quality, the elements in the arrow are the 3 elements that you find in the arrow for getting from still minimum quality to high quality that we find in the first 4 sections of the standards of quality. So I saw in the chat that someone asked about the application process. So if we go to the next slide, please. So it's expected that family resource centers will spend a long time preparing. So sort of get in the rhythm of getting their staff certified in the standards, as the continuum that Julie shared with us earlier showed, and that they'll use the standards of quality for family strengthening and support and the operational standards for family resource centers of quality, and assess their programs and make, do action planning and work on improving their quality. It's a criteria for Family Resource Center of Quality designation that a program meets at least foundational quality on all indicators in both sets of standards. So they should, so when they get to that point, when they've done the action planning and the work on those 2 sets of standards, then that means that could denote readiness, that they're ready to seek designation. So New Hampshire Children's Trust, as a facilitating organization, offers technical assistance in an ongoing way, but also, when it's needed, like, it can be requested at any time, on both doing their self-assessment, doing any action planning for trainings that may be needed, etc. And but when they decide that they're ready, they complete their application, and which all our Family Support New Hampshire website has a page on FRCQ, and will has all the documents related to applying for FRCQ. If people want to check that out, it's at fsnh.org. And so when they're ready, they submit their application to the trust, who then passes it on to the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council. And then the Wellness and Primary Prevention Council identifies a review team of 3 to 4 people. And we like to have, we invite Wellness and Primary Prevention Council members to be certified in the standards. And obviously the members that represent family resource centers usually are, but there have been others that just choose to kind of get a better grounding in the work to have gotten certified as well. So we try to have review teams to have at least 1 member, and hopefully more, that are certified in the standards. And then the review team members review the application. They do a site visit. The review process itself usually takes about 90 days, or it sometimes can be a little bit more. As they review the application, they come together and they share their initial impressions. And after the initial impressions, the applying FRC receives a report that kind of sets the agenda for the site visit. And then there's a site visit, and then the review team makes formulates, that's the word I'm looking for, a recommendation to bring to the WPPC about whether the center meets criteria for designation. And then the WPPC decides whether a center should be designated. And if they are designated, it is for 3 years. And then there's a redesignation process. So as I said, at this point, there are 11 FRCs, so a little bit more than half of our FRCs have gone through this process and have been designated as a Family Resource Center of Quality. So now I just want to take a little bit of time and talk about New Hampshire Children's Trust's role as a facilitating organization, because it has been an integral part of of promoting using the standards, and also of creating the sustainable network of family resource centers of quality. So when New Hampshire, as I said, all the FRC partners, FSNH, New Hampshire Children's Trust, and many other stakeholders at the table, when we envisioned a facilitating organization, we saw it as leveraging family resource centers by increasing efficiency, elevating messaging, creating funding pathways, and providing backbone support in all the ways that are demonstrated on this slide. So that is what we were awarded the contract to do in 2019. So we provide technical assistance and support in both the standards of quality. When Family Support New Hampshire was just our partner and not a program of our organization, we partnered with them in offering the standards training to New Hampshire. We offer technical assistance on the FRCQ process and in implementing in the standards, but we do let that piece about supporting the FRCs in doing their self-assessment, we kind of that's kind of by request. We don't mandate that we're involved, for instance, in their self-assessment process, but we're available here to support them. Our communications department has been very involved in elevating awareness of FRCs, and as I said, FRCs are much more acknowledged and recognized and thought of when there's an opportunity to implement a primary prevention initiative in New Hampshire. Another huge piece is the shared measurement that we've been able to offer. Actually, so this is sort of an overview slide. I'm gonna have you go to the next slide and kind of talk about each of these elements a little bit more. So I've already talked a little bit about the designation process. So we kind of provide support on two sides, both, as I said, that technical assistance side to the family resource centers. We host communities of practice as it's relevant, but we also provide backbone support to the WPPC and kind of assuring consistency in the process and just helping shepherd the process along by just providing sort of backbone support to the review team members and making sure review teams are there when applications get submitted, etc. Okay, next slide, please. So I think this slide might be a little out of date. I noticed on the slide that the network, and they would know, it says that we've offered 29 SOQ trainings. I had 24. I don't know what the difference is, but the 624 is absolutely right. So this June 19, 2019 date is when we began being the facilitating organization, and I think it's a few more than 7, but in total, since 2015, Family Support New Hampshire and New Hampshire Children's Trust together have done I think 29 trainings, and 624 individuals are certified in the standards in New Hampshire. So yeah, and I think I've already talked about the other things. So next slide, please. So another vision of the facilitating organization is that that efficiency of getting funding through to FRCs. And we really saw this as something that would happen kind of down the road. But the state, in issuing its funding, the request for proposals, put Kinship Navigation program right there. So we, when we got the contract to become the facilitating organization in June of 2019, it was part of our contract that we had to stand up a Kinship Navigation program that are embedded Kinship Navigators throughout the state within FRCs. So as some of you may know, this Kinship Navigators provide resources and support to relatives who are raising kin. And they may be formal, informal, they may be involved with the child protection system or may not be. But we created, I believe it is the only one in the country, a kinship navigation program that again was able to bring public funding to some FRCs that were not did not have the bandwidth to accept a state contract on their own. But the facilitating organization has been given us the opportunity to put kinship navigators in communities where they were needed, and we have a network of 20 throughout the state. And so that was a really, it was definitely building the plane while we were flying it, but it was a very immediate benefit of the facilitating organization to the FRCs, and they saw it, right away. So next slide, please. Another thing that we were able to do is that we created a shared measure data system. So it was New Hampshire Children's Trust partnered with the Behavioral Health Improvement Institute at Keene State College to establish a common data system. And it was the first time that Family Resource Centers had a common data system. Because there is such, there are a variety of data systems that Family Resource Centers in New Hampshire use and often are or required because of other funding sources to put data into. It is not a universal data system. Right now, we could say that the data that is in it are those that the funding that comes through the facilitating organization. If we're funding something, then the data related to that funding goes into the FSDS, but we've had a lot of luck and investment from other parts of the state. For instance, many of our family resource centers or several family resource centers hold a state contract, and the state said that the vendors of that contract need to, or the data related to that contract also goes into the FSDS. So it's allowed us to provide a uniform data system so that we can tell more of the FRC story than we ever could before. And so we employ we have a data administrator on staff that works to modify the system and helps FRCs run reports in ways that they couldn't before. And we also are able to tell that collective story. Next slide, please. The other thing that the facilitating organization has been able to do is elevate both Family Support New Hampshire as well as Family Resource Centers. So just given them expanded a lot of capacity, worked with Fsnh to renew or revive or their logo, kind of updated a little bit, and redesigned their website, and basically did a lot and created a consistent communication sort of approach or campaign navigation and around Family Resource Centers in general. We host a communicators community of practice. We've done some joint, created some social media collateral that Family Resource Centers can deploy, which so that again creates that consistency in messaging, and it really has helped to elevate FRCs. Next slide, please. So the system at having a facilitating organization and having this very public Family Resource Center of Quality process has really raised the visibility. In New Hampshire, we used to have there was a tendency in New Hampshire that oftentimes when there was thoughts of continuing or starting a new initiative, that sometimes cross-sector people would start conceptualizing things that sounded very much like FRCs or duplicated what FRCs were already doing. And now that seems that there's much more, FRCs are much more considered part of the landscape in New Hampshire, and now it's much more likely that people would think of FRCs as being able to fulfill a role rather than creating something new. The facilitating organization has been able to pass through over $4.4 million in funding to FRCs. that they may not have access to or been able to access so easily. And as I said earlier, Family Support New Hampshire is now a program of New Hampshire Children's Trust. We continue our strong partnership, and that merger happened in April of 2022, and in June of 2022, Liz Scrutton joined our staff as the program specialist, and her primary responsibility is coordinating FSNH. So I'm going to let her speak for a few minutes about what that coordination looks like and how what's been happening and what the future holds. So you can go to the next slide, and Liz will take us home.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks everybody for hopping on and learning about our little state here in the top northeast corner of the United States. So as Maria mentioned, the merger really created a new pathway. This volunteer-led initiative could only go so far. So when the strategic plan really did kind of lead them to believe that they needed an additional support, that's when my position was created. And since I started back in June, I've had the pleasure of visiting the FRCs. It was my goal to get out to visit everybody, to understand what their programs look like, to see what they really saw as their strengths, and to really understand what they were wanting out of a network. And a lot of the things that we have learned are things that we could have assumed. They wanted to continue to be able to network with one another. They wanted to continue best practice sharing. We have just finished and finalized a New Hampshire or FSNH Advisory Council. So I'm excited to be able to call and connect with those individuals within the next few weeks to ask them to fully serve on that advisory committee. And that's going to really help to maintain the voice of the network. We did not want to come in and change things or institute things that the network didn't want. We really wanted this to be an approach just like an FRC would be in a community. We wanted to identify what the community wants, what the community needs, and figure out where we place in all of that. We were excited to include our FRC directors in the first annual Fsnh Summit, which happened just a few weeks ago, where we went to kind of this green sustainable farm, if you will, that has this niche for team building and getting those kind of networking vibes going. And it was a great experience. We invited all of the FRC leaders around the state, and most of them came. We were able to kind of, I think, hopefully put some concerns to rest, that we weren't going to just come in and change things as we saw fit. Is we really wanted to maintain, excuse me, that voice and hear what their concerns were. We've got some shifts that have happened in the state, specifically with our DHHS contact, which has a lot of them very concerned about their funding streams, everything like that. So we have just been trying to keep the communication as transparent as possible, and continue to be able to push on behalf of those FRCs. So we've been really excited to just kind of dive in and hear what's been going on. We have some upcoming events that we are hopeful will be able to fundraise, not just for our primary prevention here at the Trust, but also for things that FRCs need. Luckily, they've had a great voice behind them. And as Maria mentioned, some of those funding opportunities during COVID and even coming out of COVID have been instrumental in standing families up and making FRCs become noticed in a way that they maybe hadn't become noticed yet. So it was a really exciting time. In terms of what's coming in the future, like I said, we have that new advisory council or advisory board that I'm really hoping will help me to navigate to make sure that we're doing what they want to do. We heard recently that they really want to continue advocacy efforts, and they want to learn how to do that. So we've had the opportunity to start figuring out what kinds of training plans we can put into place so that they can cash in on some of those kinds of professional development opportunities. We talk a lot about sustainability. We talk a lot about giving opportunities to their staff members that might not be in a leadership role, but they want to grow and they want to mold. So it's been pretty exciting to kind of go through that process. We've got some new communication strategies coming out, including a newsletter. We have our monthly meetings that they can kind of send me things in advance to put on agenda. And then we're also always looking within our own networks to figure out resources that might be able to come in and talk to the network at large and help them to understand what they may not know about. As well as we all try to keep up with staffing, resources can kind of go on the back burner for a bit. And we would hate to have a family looking for something and somebody not have that information. So that's kind of the forward focus with this merger for Family Support New Hampshire and the Children's Trust. As Maria said, we are available to them for TA for both the quality designation and really anything else. We do a lot with business management. We're working on some training opportunities for that. So that is pretty much, I think, just about our time. So I wanted to make sure that I stopped a little early so you had any opportunity to put any questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. We're looking at both. Maria, was there anything else that I missed? Or Julie, was there anything else you were hoping that we would highlight?
No, thanks, Liz. I guess the sort of to tie it all together, that just really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've been able to do in New Hampshire, and just hopefully you got the sense of how integral the standards have been to like just kicking all of this off, and just to be to have a very prominent and central role in raising raising the specter of family resource centers in New Hampshire. We believe in them very strongly here, and the standards have really provided opportunities for centers to focus on quality practice, and also just to be affirming of their practice, because usually the experience of family resource centers is that the standards is very affirming of their practice. At their on first read, they're like, oh, we do that. That's just been a really powerful experience to help us support the folks who are supporting families.
Well, thank you so much, Maria and Liz. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to share with all of us today. We appreciate it so much. And it's so exciting to see, from back at the table when we were bringing the standards national, and now all that's happened since then in New Hampshire. It's incredible. So thank you all so much. And if you have questions, please enter those into the question and answer part of the Zoom console. We'll come back for questions in just a moment. So there's some considerations here. Maria touched on these just as you're thinking about the standards and the benefits that they saw in New Hampshire. And so some considerations for you all for why you might want to adopt the standards. And so after these webinars, a lot of the times folks are like, this is so awesome. What can we do next? So we outlined some sample next steps for you. And so if you haven't already, download the standards, review them, download the program or the network implementation continuum, and take a look at those to chart out what might be next, and participate in a certification training. You can check out to see if they're offered in your state, and if they're not, we have open ones that we open to folks across the country as well. And you also can learn about bringing the standards to your state as well if you don't yet have trainers. And so want to just remind you, if you haven't put questions in yet, while you're entering in your questions, want to highlight we have another wonderful webinar coming up later this month. This one is about family resource centers, specifically engaging and supporting fathers to succeed. So encourage you to check that one out. There's other webinar Wednesdays that you can view the recordings for on the website. So I encourage you to check those out as well. And here you can see we've highlighted the open certification trainings that are coming up in September and October. I know the September one is filling up quickly, but there is still room, and there's room in the October one as well. So be sure to check those out if you're interested in the certification training. This is another training opportunity that we are excited to highlight. A lot of the folks that are interested in learning about the standards are also interested in further developing parent leadership in their communities. So this is a concrete way that you can do that. And it's so whether you're starting a new parent advisory committee or wanting to strengthen an existing one, this is a great way to start. And it's co-trained by a national parent leader as well as one of our NFSN team members. So encourage you to check that out as well. That's offered monthly and fill up quickly also. And we also want to highlight the Together for Families conference that is coming up in October. This is, we are actually approaching the limit for this will be capped at with a certain number of participants. So if you haven't already gotten your tickets, make sure you get those as well. This is our big tent conference that we offer every other year. And so there's a track specifically for the standards, some excellent presenters, other wonderful content as well for our field. So I encourage you to check that out. You can go to the togetherforfamilies.org website to check out the agenda and learn more about the sessions. And I'll put this up here as well if you want to get a hold of us to learn more about NFSN membership or talk more about the standards. And so let's go to questions. We are, there's a question in here. If you, and I just want to flag too, if you've been entering any questions in the chat, I don't want to have missed any of them. So thank you for those of you that move those over to the Q&A. We just make sure we get them all answered. The first one is about, do you need to officially be trained in the standards in order to use them? The answer is no. Anybody can use the standards. You can download them. You can use the implementation tools. They're available for anybody to use. That being said, just looking at the great and beneficial work that Maria and Liz have shared, there is value in participating in the certification training. You have an opportunity to really dive into them and learn from your peers. And so I encourage you to explore that definitely as well. And there's a question for Maria and Liz. And the question is, what sorts of information is collected in the family support data system?
So I can talk a little bit about that, although our data administrator, who is very excited to talk about that, can give more details. So I'm happy to provide. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I can connect you to her. It does collect demographic information and some assessment information. It is programs do not have access to each other's data, and there's some aggregate data that's reported out to the state. So it is, it is some FRCs use it as their only data collection system, and they're entering data into it. It's for initiatives that are not funded by pass-through funds coming through the facilitating organization or otherwise required by a funder. Family resource centers can choose to use the FSDS to use their as their data management system, but they're not required to. So it depends on the project. For instance, we have a grant to help with health it's a health disparities grant and helps with resource navigation. So in that program or that app, the Family Support Data System is created on a QuickBase platform, which has apps for different initiatives. So in that particular program, there's questions about whether the difficulties the families are experiencing or the need for resources that the families experiencing is in any way connected to COVID. And other, obviously in our kinship navigation program, I'm going to presume that there's questions about what kind of kinship arrangement it is. So it's family level data, although we do use the QuickBase system for other data needs, like such, for instance, that's where our standards of quality certification database is. So we do use it for other things, but the section of the platform that's the family support data system is family level data that's dependent on the initiative that family's involved in.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria.
Sure. I do see a question in the chat about how FRCs get designated, and I think it was entered before I went through the application process. So if that's a question that you still have, then please put it in the Q&A and we'd be happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, I believe it was because I saw Liz respond that that was coming up.
Okay.
And there's a question just answered here, which does implementing a formal system to track families and services impact family participation at the centers? Were there concerns from families? And if so, how did you overcome that?
So that's getting to a technical aspect of it, but we were very, any data that's brought out is definitely, it's de-identified and in the aggregate. Like, I think that only agencies have access to their own data about specific families, except for, of course, our data administrator, who can access it and needs to access it for reasons. But we have data sharing agreements that was developed, and again, we're tracking things like numbers and demographics. We're not tracking family specific information when we're reporting out.
Great. Thanks, Maria. And I see we're at time, and I see there's a couple other questions that came in. So just as a reminder, if you do need to hop off, completely understand. And as a reminder, the evaluation will pop up when you leave. So be sure to fill that out. That it will definitely help inform future webinars. And we can stick around. Well, I don't want to speak for Liz and Maria. Do you have 2 more moments to stick
Sure.
around? Okay. So there's a question about on the same topic of the consent and working with families, is there a written consent that participants would complete?
I am not sure on the answer in that question, so I don't want, but I can, Kate, I can get back to you. I'll talk to our data administrator. And Audria, FRCs, I mean, whether they work the standards, like whether they apply either standards, is totally voluntary, and applying for working towards becoming designated as a family resource center of quality is also voluntary, although more and more increasingly the system is going to evolve. That funding, there may be funding that is, that is required to be designated to qualify for certain funding or certain benefits of designation. So then, then the question, is it really voluntary? If to get certain funding, you have to do it. So so if a center wants to be designated, then they need to be looking at both sets of standards, and I would just invite you to maybe download them. But technically, the standards of quality for family strengthening and support are national standards of like what your practice looks like if you're working in a strength-based way and working with families in equal partnership. The operational standards is what your organization looks like. So are you an organization that's in New Hampshire? It's a thing. I don't know if it's a thing everywhere, that in order to be a fiscally, you have to have a certificate of good standing that says that you've dotted all your I's as an organization and crossed all your T's with the Secretary of State. So that's a standard. Do you have a certificate of good standing with the Secretary of State? Do you have adequate staffing to provide all your programs? Do you there's 5 core services that New Hampshire has identified as being essential for family resource centers. Do you provide some services in all of the courses? So it's what does your family resource center look like? Not like how are you involving families and working with them in a strength-based way? So those are essentially the differences in a very quick overview. And I'd be happy to have you reach out to me or Julie to talk more about that.
Thank you so much. Let's put in the
thanks.
chat the link about the FRC equality designation there, so you can download those if you'd like to. All right. Well, thank you all for staying on a little bit longer with us and for your great questions. We hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks again for being here. And thank you again so much to Liz and Maria for presenting today. And just as a reminder, if you could answer that, complete the evaluation when that pops up when you exit today. We do read every one and appreciate your feedback. So thank you again. I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.